we're running at such a fast pace, and I think taking time out to participate in these types of events, these types of webinars and calls or podcasts are really, really important, because research shows that it's important for women to be part of something bigger than themselves. It helps them really navigate their professional and personal lives, and it provides a lot of value, because obviously we become increasingly scarce in these tech roles across the country and across the world. And for any of you that follow NCWIT, the National Center for Women in Technology, they've done several studies that show that the dropout rate in STEM careers really happens at around the age of 35. And it's primarily higher in tech-based careers. So finding a group of people you can connect with, learn with, experiment, ask questions is really healthy and can help with the duration and length of your career. We'll talk a little bit about self-efficacy later, but self-efficacy is noted in most of these studies is women that have a vision for where they want to go and then believing they can achieve it. And by surrounding yourself around women that are on similar paths, ahead or behind you, can really cultivate that momentum. So sort of pat yourself on the back right now for taking the time to join the call and get some information to help you work on your career, because we know many of our conference calls and meetings aren't much about working in our career. So this is essentially my career trajectory. And probably like many of the women in tech, there's many stops and turns, changes of organizations that might take us off track or potentially stall us or even catapult us in the direction we desire. But I wanted to just share some information around the fact that, where you start isn't always where you're going to end. And even though I started in a highly technical role at Accenture, where I was programming routers and designing LANs for wireless networks, my career jumped from small business to large business to IPO. I then jumped into an organization that trained EEE or EE students to become computer scientists, and I used to teach TCP/IP and LAN WAN design. And then I jumped into a high flyer out of Silicon Valley, which I started with a lot of their technical training and then moved into a channel position. And then I took a little departure from high tech and moved into a director of IT role for almost 2 years with an angle of attracting and fostering tech-based businesses in the area I moved to be with my husband. After 2 years of doing this, I realized I really needed to get back into high tech on Silicon Valley. And then I jumped back into VMware with many of the contacts that I worked with at Inktomi. I spent about 8 years at VMware in a variety of roles. This is where I've had my first child and my second child. And when I tried to have a global position, have 2 children, and a large team, I realized that the wheels of my bus were starting to fall off. And so I took a personal passion in starting interviewing women that were 5, 10, 15 years ahead of me in my career and asking them, how are you doing this? How do you keep everything going? Because this is very difficult, especially as you get higher up in the organization. And from that information, I gathered best practices, skills, and tips, and I felt like I needed to share it with other women. And that's when I produced my first book, The Working Woman's GPS, which then catapulted me to talk to women's groups in Cisco, IBM, Microsoft, and many others. And from that is when I started Tech Savvy Women. I did this off the side of my desk because I still had a full-time cloud role at VMware. But I definitely had a calling to continue to advance professional women, and especially in these high male-dominated careers, because I find that it's difficult to ask questions, it's difficult to maneuver the landscape when you don't have a pack of people. And I think these types of groups are absolutely instrumental. And then I produced my second book just a year ago. And so my first book is very much about getting yourself in line with where you need to be. And then my second book is How to Maneuver the Professional Landscape. And I think it's just really important to realize that you need to work as much sort of on yourself and on your direction as you do in your career, because time gets away from you so quickly. I'm in my mid-40s now, and a bunch of the information I've included is stuff I wish somebody had told me early on in my career, because I definitely think it might have changed the trajectory or at least the level of momentum I had in my career. So with that, these conversations are interesting. So I go out to a lot of women's groups, and we have all types of conversations. And I think it's important to note that not all women want to go up. Not all women are looking to be the CXO in a private company or public company. Many are looking to get on board. Some are looking to change roles. Some want to start a small project or a small product in their office, off the side of their desk. And so I find that women are so interesting because most women that I meet with at some level all desire to have more influence and impact. So they like what they're doing now, but they're like, I just have a little bit more to give, or I want to make more influence. I want to be more influential in my industry. I want to have more impact in my community. And so when I talk to women's groups, oftentimes I suggest that they sort of get an idea of where do you want to have more influence and impact this year or in the next year and a half, because I think that really helps solidify your self-efficacy that I'll talk about a little bit more. Having a vision of where you want to go next or where you want to have influence and impact next is really important. So for those of you that are listening in, it might be interesting just to write it down, just like, where do I want to have more influence and impact? Do I want to get on a different project? Do I want to get promoted? Do I want to join a board? Do I want to start a family? I mean, there are a lot of things that are in flux for women. Mm-hmm. And if you're driving, please do not write it down. Just mentally collect it. But I think these are the kind of things that we need to keep track of, because these are the goals we need to be running towards. And I'm going to show you a couple ways to do that. And so as we talk at these different sessions and I talk to women and we write down where we want to have more influence and impact, right away for women comes career obstacles. Women start talking about, well, I could, but I have to do this, or I don't have the right people in my network, or I don't really know how to find a sponsor, or gosh, I just don't think I'm ready for that. Or where do I find these opportunities, or how do I create more relevance? Because a lot of people see me where I am and not necessarily where I want to be. And I think these are super common obstacles for women. It's interesting because I feel like many of the women that I talk to, and even I did a virtual meeting this morning with a group of women. One of the women mentioned at the end that her manager tapped her on the shoulder and said, I'd really like for you to apply for this job. And she told him she wasn't ready. So I think sometimes, there's a lot of things that we're dealing with internally about how we feel about ourselves, and externally of what's happening in the corporations we work in and in the industries. And so this was sort of the next stage for me, is how do you start to dig through this information so that you can give women a playbook? Because I find that most women are struggling on how to push their career forward. They're doing great work. They're delivering great results, but they're not really getting tapped on the shoulder as much as they want, or they're not getting the projects that they want. And that's really what I want to spend, the next 20 minutes talking about here, is how do you position yourself for the influence and impact you desire to have next. So I can't go through the whole framework. This took me about 2 years to create, but essentially I'm going to give you sort of an overview and kind of tell you what we're going to talk about. So what I found is, when I first started thinking about this playbook for professional women, I thought about, a lot of it's going to be networking and how women network and who they connect with. But after doing the research, I had to start with how women position themselves in the workplace. Because what I found is that a lot of women play down their accomplishments, don't talk about their milestones, and aren't often relevant based on where they want to have influence and impact next. Mm-hmm. So, and I've experienced this myself, because at VMware, I've had about 4 or 5 roles at VMware. I actually started in a sales role because I was pregnant when they hired me. I was 6 months pregnant. I was completely open with the company. They were aware I was pregnant, but I took a sales role because it was a local opportunity and I didn't have to travel that much. Mm-hmm. But then 3 or 4 years later, I wanted to get back into a technical role. That's my basis. I wanted to get into emerging technologies. But when I raised my hand to move in the technical role, the company was like, we really like you where you're at. You're doing an awesome job where you're at. And so I had to figure out how to rebrand myself, because when I moved into the company, I went into a sales role. So everyone saw me as a sales leader and not necessarily a technical leader. And so I had to rebrand myself in doing that. And about 12 months later, I did end up getting the cloud role that I had aspired to lead go-to-market for cloud. But it took me 12 months. And so I weave that story into this book because I think it's really important for women to recognize that branding yourself for where you want to go next is absolutely critical. It's great to do a good job where you're at. It's great to collect data based on where you're at, but you have to be thinking about where do I want to have impact next, and how do I get the right people around me to cultivate those opportunities. And so this is the framework for the book. I won't be able to get into all of it, but there's a lot of free data online that I'm going to highlight. I've written articles about just about everything that's in the book that's all free, and a ton of videos, which I'll show you at the end. And so in doing that, I think for women, I always start with writing down your accomplishments. And you'll see I'm teeing you up for something, but for a lot of women, I talk to them about you really need to quantify your value based on where you are and where you've been. And so I go through a series of questions with women, which is about what is your most notable projects? Mm-hmm. What significant accomplishments did you achieve within these projects? What special projects were you assigned and why? What kind of recognition did you receive? And who could you call on as a reference or a sponsor that could highlight your impact? So I do this on purpose because for a lot of women that I meet, especially ones that are calling me to say, hey, I just lost my job, or my boss just left and I think I'm going to lose my job, or I need to get a new job, or I want to get on a board, I often ask women to describe to me their like, what's the value you provide in the role you're in today? And a lot of times I have women, they'll talk for 15, 20 minutes, but it takes them a long time to really get to the nut of what they do for the organization. And I often refer to the vectors for people to describe their work. So there's 3 vectors that I refer to, and Jeffrey Tovis talks about this in his book, Why Women. He's based out of Atlanta. And it's the revenue vector. So do you increase revenue for the organization? And if so, how do you do it? Do you streamline operations for your organization or for your customers? Or do you enhance the brand and the market viability of your organization? So how does your work today fall on those vectors? And how can you quantify the projects you have? And this is really important because women have a very difficult time talking about their successes. And so I often, women will say, oh, I'm trying to get this job, and even though I'm not a resume coach or anything, I'll often say, oh, let me see your resume. And I'll scan through trying to find how they weave in their story. And so I send a lot of people to a couple resume people I work with because I think embedding your accomplishments, not only in your LinkedIn summary, but also your resume and how you talk about yourself is absolutely instrumental because you're essentially dropping the seeds to people that can help open doors for you. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And what I find oftentimes too is women lack sponsors. They really lack sponsors. These are not mentors. Mentors are people who just give you advice, but sponsors are people who will use their social capital to help you get where you want to go. So they'll make a phone call on your behalf, connect you to someone on LinkedIn, maybe put your name on a short list at a conference room you're not in. But they can only do that if they know your work. So they're either your manager, which they can see your work, and oftentimes they're not always your manager, they're somebody else. So you have to have a way of quantifying your value to them so that they can represent you.
Right.
And a lot of women will say to me like, gosh, JJ, this is so much work. Like I have my day job to do. I agree. It is a lot of work. It took me 12 months to change my trajectory to get the job I wanted after being told no. So, and it wasn't a mean no, it was like, hey, we just don't see you in this light. So I had to go out and find new sponsors. I had to build a new network of people. And I did that during my day job. And so because I was a customer facing, I could talk to them about different things. And so I started talking to my customers in 2008 about cloud, which was almost unheard of then. But then I got the product managers in. I started talking to new people at corporate about marketing material to get some of my customers around the ideas of cloud. And in doing so, I started to build out my network. I started to increase my relevance around the topic, which helped position me for something later. Mm-hmm. So you have to be strategic when you think of your career. And, for a lot of women, I say there's no mistake why we're getting buried in middle level. Right. We get buried in the middle level so much because we don't have the sponsors to pull us up. And oftentimes they don't have the sponsors because we don't do a good job of articulating our value. So that's a lot of stuff there. But, you know, I'm going to just show you a couple other things just to say, you know, just to kind of back up this, because I think it's important to note. And I think resumes are easy because they're quantifiable. So I love this resume, the Resume Gap by Keira Snyder, which was in Fortune. And she has a great article out there. It's on the bottom here. But basically, women use twice as many words on their resume, but only a third of the value, or a third of the descriptive bullet points that can designate how they've increased the revenue, streamlined operations, or enhanced the brand. And so I think it's just so telling is that we do a lot of describing, but we don't do a good job of really allowing people to quantify our value. So I have quite a few videos out there. On this particular video, surprising resume differences between men and women, it's on the YouTube channel. You can search for it. It'll show you a resume of system engineers. So there's a woman system engineer and a man system engineer, and you can quickly see how they describe themselves. The men use a lot of numbers and a lot of defining words, where women are more collaboration, drove to market, more descriptive words that don't really allow you to get a handle on. And I'm always happy to show my resume too, because I think it's important. You know, I basically pulled a lot of my deliverables and skill sets up to the top, so people don't have to dig through all of my job descriptions to decide what value I provide. So I think it's important. I've had to really get comfortable with this, and I have to say I was very uncomfortable doing this. So I think that's important. And for those of you that are thinking, gosh, how do I have enough time to do this? Time is a big thing. Time is your largest asset, and how you use it and what you assign your time to is really, really important. And so I am a really big believer in the power of yes and the power of no. And so if you're sitting here thinking, you know, what's taking up my time now? What additional experiences do I need to increase my influence and impact? Do I need help getting these opportunities? Can I get to them on my own, or do I need help doing it? And are these opportunities stretching my skill set, or do I already know how to do this work? Because I have a lot of women doing the same job over and over again. And not only does it hurt your confidence, but it also sort of disables your ability to increase your self-efficacy. Because as I mentioned earlier, self-efficacy is having not only a vision of where you want to go, but believing you can achieve it. And believing you can achieve it is important, and it really comes from you taking risks, meaning you're not completely prepared for the opportunity, you're stretching yourself in a new way, and you're checking the box, or you're putting the product out the door, or you're getting that new customer. Those opportunities allow you to build your self-efficacy that enable you to catapult in your desired direction. So I think that's really important. And then how do I handle all my to-dos? So these are challenges that I see all the time for women, because as many of you know, you have your day job, you have your second shift at home, and some of you are managing elderly parents, siblings, children, and other people maybe in your neighborhood or community, and there's just a lot going on. And so if you're one of those people that are thinking, this is great, JJ, but how am I going to get this done? I put together the power of no, and what it is, it's a chart similar to the one I'm going to show you at the end. It's a different chart. It's a power of no. It's a free chapter to my book, and it's a 12-minute video that really helps you hone in on where you're spending your time. And are you spending your time aligning to what's important to you now, or where you want to go next? Because if you're not spending time sort of on those two things, you're doing things as a favor or because you want to, which is great, but you need to manage how much time you're doing it. And I talk a lot about how some things can take, 10 times longer than you really want to put into it. And how do you ask people about what they're asking you to do in a way that maybe you can take it from a 30-hour commitment down to a 3-hour commitment. So it gives you confidence in putting the right things in your calendar and on your schedule. So
very helpful.
It's great. I'll tell you, it's something I use all the time. I just booked another big event just doing that, just talking to women about saying yes to the right things, because we feel guilty. We want people to like us. And in doing so, we end up doing a lot of our time each day and each month is spent on things that aren't really going to catapult us in the desired direction. So, I can't really leave the call without talking about our self-imposed boundaries. And this is something that I've been challenged with for years, and I know a lot of other women. And I just, about a year and a half ago, I started a mindfulness practice. And it is something that's really helped me get some space between my person and my constant voice in my head that's saying, you can do this, or you can't do this, or you're good at this, or you're not good at this. It's a voice in our head that is constantly talking to us. And the mindfulness practice for me has really helped me be able to compartmentalize that voice and even be able to alter that voice in a more positive way. Because many times we're telling ourselves we can and can't do things before we've even tried.
Right.
Before we've
our own worst enemies.
Gone for it.
Yeah.
And so, that is something that I think many, many women have to spend some time just recognizing what you say to yourself all day long and then what you do about it. And if you needed some sort of mental space or mental mind power to get over that voice, I'm happy to talk to anybody about mindfulness, because it has been a game changer for me of really creating space in my head to realize that that voice is nonstop. It's often driven by my ego, and my ego is often driven by fear and wanting to be liked and things that can be important but can often drive me off a cliff. So what I like about this study is I'm not the only one, right? Meryl Streep, Sheryl Sandberg, all deal with this voice all the time. And I would encourage you to think about what is driving you, and do you let that inner voice control where you spend time, who you spend time with, what projects you work on, what things you go for. Because I feel like overall women have been holding themselves back because we feel like we have to be 100% prepared, and we feel like we have to know everything about it, and we have to feel good about it before we move forward. In fact, there's an HP study. They posted some jobs internally, and they monitored who applied for them. And what they found is that most of the jobs that they posted were applied for by men. And they went back and asked people that they thought should have applied for the job. And they said, why didn't you apply for the job? Most of which were women. And the women would say, well, I'm not 100% qualified. And what the study showed is that men feel pretty comfortable at 70% to apply for a position, where women often wait till 100% to apply. So again, one of my assessments is why we're kind of in middle management is because we're not raising our hands enough. We're not pushing forward because we feel like we're not 100% prepared. Mm-hmm. And what I can assure you is that nobody is 100% prepared. If anyone's written a job description, you put everything you could possibly hope for on that job description. There's no one that's going to meet all of those
qualifications. Yep. No.
So if you're 70% there, go for it, because believe me, they will tell you no. People are so quick to tell you no. So don't tell yourself no. Let other people assess you. Get in the interview pool. Get experience explaining your value. And this is important if you want to get on a board too. I mean, a board is no different than getting a new job. You're constantly interviewing and positioning to be on boards. And I think we need more women on boards, not only because the data says it, but we have to do it. But we can't be waiting until we're 80 to be on boards when we finally feel like we're ready. We got to start for this now of getting used to being on nonprofit boards and then launch into for-profit, even if it's a small company. So you can tell I get so passionate, but I just wanted...
And that's a good thing.
Yes, I'm very passionate about advancing professional women. And, the one thing I just want to end on is, and this is something very tactical that you can take with you, is that, when I was in these roles, I got a lot of projects, new projects, sometimes every day, every week, every quarter. And I didn't really think much about project allocation or alignment, but after reading so much for the second book, I realized that I found this great study that talked about project alignment, and essentially that men get better projects than women. I mean, that's essentially the bottom line. The data is here on the slide, but not only do they get better projects, they get more line of sight to executives, and they get more information on sort of the overall value of the project to the business. So they're aligned more to big projects that get more budget and more line of sight. And that helps people get promoted when you have that type of access. And so if you have your sights on getting promoted or taking on bigger projects or being more instrumental in your organization, take a look at the projects you're working on now, because those projects often get you to where you want to go, or often determine where you go next, and you got to make sure they align to where you want to go next. And so, I'm big on creating things that are going to help me determine my gaps and my opportunities. And so we have a chart that we're going to distribute for you today, but this is a chart I created for myself and my team to help me understand what projects we're working on, why we're working on them, and what they do, not only for me individually. I had a chart for me individually, but I also had a chart for my team. And so for those of you that are calling in, the charts basically across the top, you have your different project names. And then down the left-hand column, there's about 7 lines. And the first and foremost is, does this project align to where I am now or where I want to go next? So your influence and impact goals that we talked about earlier on when we started the call. The second one is, what impact does this project have on the company, from the revenue, the operations, and the brand we discussed? What's the benefit to your customers? What's the level of executive visibility? Do I have responsibility for profit and loss? What type of opportunity do I have in growing my skill set? So is this a project that I've done 10 times, or is this a new project that gives me opportunities in new ways? Because you want to always be developing skill sets. You don't want to take layups every project. It's not going to help you in the long run. What level of professional fulfillment do I have? And what's the milestone and timeline for this project? Because I added that line at the end because I don't want all my projects to have milestones hitting in the same week, because that can make for a very tired professional. Mm-hmm. So this is something that we're going to send out to you after the call, but it's something that I use on a regular basis as I'm taking on projects, and I discuss it with my team so that we know why our team, why our organization, why our department matters to the bigger goals. And I think focusing the projects this way has helped give some enriched experiences to the members on my teams. And hopefully you can add to it, you can remove from it. I've used it in an Excel spreadsheet, and it's something I created so you can leverage it in other ways if you need to. So with that, I want to have time for questions, but I just want to say that there is a YouTube channel that we mentioned earlier, Tech Savvy Women. You can subscribe to it. It'll notify you when I put new videos up. But most of the videos are about advancing professional women in the workplace. We have over 170 videos that I've created over the last few years. And hopefully you'll be able to find the data that you need to advance through your career in the direction you desire in 2018. So hopefully we'll stay connected. Again, it's JJ DiGeronimo. You can connect with me on LinkedIn in other ways. Or if you have questions or you're listening to this after the fact, you can always reach out to me. So thank you so much for the opportunity to join with you. And hopefully we have a question or two.
Questions, ladies?
Or comments. Is there something that resonated with you too that maybe you didn't think about, or that you'll think about in a new way?
Well, I absolutely agree with you in regard to women hesitating in order to step up and advance themselves. One of the things that I'm working on here in Chicago is really getting women to talk more at various tech conferences, talks, meetups, and so forth, because that's an absolutely perfect way in order to highlight your expertise. And the more we can do that, as men are doing every day, every month, then people will see our value and ask us to speak out more as well.
I think that's a great point. And anyone else who wants to unmute and chime in, please do. While you're doing that, sponsors we talked about a little bit earlier. Sponsors are, in my opinion, the key differentiator, because women feel very comfortable networking at the level they're at, where men are very comfortable networking 1 and 2 levels above them, which then fosters sponsors for them for rooms that they're not in. And so if you're at a meeting or a corporate event or a kickoff or something, and you have an opportunity to talk to people that are 1 or 2 or 3 levels above you, make sure you share with them something you accomplished in 2017. Make sure you talk about the goals of the projects you have. Because what I find a lot of times is men are nervous to talk to women a lot of times, and they'll revert back to their family life, or they'll revert back to what's happening outside on the weekends. And it's our responsibility to bring them to a conversation that they'll remember us based on our work, because they're going to be in a meeting and say, hey, we need a diverse candidate, or we need someone to put on this project. Who would you recommend? If you're talking about bringing things over the finish line, they may remember you and say, hey, you should talk to Cheryl, or did you know Suzanne's working on this? So you need to champion for yourself and opportunities that are outside of work too.
Right. Anyone else have comments, questions? We have about 4 minutes left.
I had a quick question.
Sure.
So I recently was in an interview, and they had about 40 engineers, and there was only one of them that was a woman. Would you consider that a bad sign, or perhaps not necessarily? How would you?
That's a great question. I mean, not necessarily. There's just not a lot of women in engineering roles. Even though they study for engineering, sometimes they go into operational based roles and not hardcore engineering. So one point is, stay close to the technical work and the engineering work, I would say. But most of my sponsors and mentors have been men over the years, and most of my work environments, I have been the only woman, and it's been, on the majority, a really enjoyable work environment. So I wouldn't be intimidated. I think what I would look for is how much did that woman speak, because getting the table is one thing, but being an active participant and a viable leader in your own right is really important. So the culture around her participation for me would be something I'd been watching. And maybe even talking to her. I mean, she could, she might love it there. And maybe you can get a call or a conversation with her via LinkedIn or something around that.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you very much, everyone who dialed in today or jumped on the video webinar. We sincerely appreciate JJ's time. And again, you can take a look at her website, techsavvywomen.net, for much more information, as well as her YouTube channel, techsavvywomen.tv. And have a great week, everyone. You'll get the slide that JJ referred to earlier in our thank you email, which will go out tomorrow. Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much.